This house standing behind us just became vacant. I've owned this house for 16, 17 years. We've had a tenant in there for about 3 or 4 years that just moved out. We're gonna be talking about what you need to do or the choices you have when a tenant moves out about getting it spruced up to re-rent it.
Spoiler alert, we have different opinions on what to do.
I bought this house in 2004. We paid $135 for it, and I remember the story. Isn't that funny how you remember the stories of every house you bought?
When you have like a brain like a computer like you do remember everything, but yes, keep going.
I can tell you the stories about every seller we've ever bought a house
I
from.
believe it.
This couple was an engineer who was like a nuclear engineer, I believe, and he got his dream job, and he had to be like in Indianapolis in a week. So he wanted somebody to close on it quick. So we bought it for $135, which was a pretty good discount at the time. It really didn't need hardly any work. And as a matter of fact, when you go in, this is 16 years later, it's still pretty much like it was 16
Haven't
years
done
ago.
much into it. There's a hint on the differences in opinions we have on what to do or not.
But right now, today, this house is probably worth $200. If it was spruced up more, $225, something like that. And the tenant that just moved out was paying $15.20 a month in rent. And we just put it back up for rent, pretty much the way it sits, for $15.50. And just went on the market today.
Awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit about the front yard. So I think I know the answer to this question, Brian. What would you do with this landscaping?
It looks pretty good, doesn't it? Maybe throw a little mulch in here and call it good?
It looks just fine. So if this was my rental, I would throw some mulch in here. I would have us kill everything and kill all the weeds and throw some mulch in there just to spruce it up a little bit. Obviously it's not necessary, but in my opinion, when somebody drives up to the house, the first thing they see is the landscaping. I'd want this looking a little bit nicer.
Yeah, so honestly, we will mulch it. That is something that I'm sure we will do. But years ago, there was bushes here and they grew up and there was just like a whole hedge in front of here. And we generally like to keep our rental houses as low maintenance as possible, and landscaping kind of becomes maintenance. So our philosophy is kind of minimize the maintenance on the outside here.
Before we take you guys inside, we need you to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Only if you do that will we let you in. Just kidding, all right, come on in. As you can see, everything's in really, really great shape. They haven't done anything but cleaned it. So you did have some good tenants in here, which is awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
We haven't even cleaned it yet, Sam.
You haven't even cleaned it yet? Wow, all right, well, never.
But we did have a good tenant in there. They moved out, they cleaned it up good. But it is dated. So
it is.
The question is, what do you do to it? And honestly, we weren't planning on doing it. We actually listed it this morning already. So we didn't really do anything to it. So
let's head into the kitchen.
come on in. So a funny story on this kitchen. So I don't know if it's funny or not. But
It's funny, it's kind of funny.
I'm sure you guys have had it happen before. So not this last tenant, but the previous tenant, they watched HGTV and decided to do some things on their own without asking for permission. And one of the things they did is they stained these cabinets. And you can kind of see the unstained version down here, the stained version. If you open the cabinet, I don't know if you can see that, but that's what the cabinets used to look like. So
They didn't do that bad of a job as far as staying in the front of it.
I don't know. I kind of think I don't like it, but it's my house. Everybody feels. But believe it or not, we last time it became vacant, we just put it up for rent. This is in a nice part of town and
very nice
people, and it's got room to it. It generally rents pretty quick.
Yep, so in here they're obviously going to leave this as is. So it's in great shape. It's not in bad shape. It's just not super trendy. It's probably a few years old. If this was my rental, I would probably spend a little bit of money and replace this countertop either with newer Formica like this or maybe newer granite.
Yeah,
So
We got this a buddy named Dusty. He always calls it Grandma Clean. I don't know if this is Grandma Clean, but this is maybe Mom Clean or something.
Yeah, I'd say so. It's mom or maybe like stepsister clean or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is definitely clean in great shape. So a little bit difference in there. This is probably fine. If I did the improvements we're going to be talking about, the difference in them, I would be asking more rent. So that's the difference thing. I'm not just going to dump money just because I'd ask more rent. I haven't done a bunch of research, but if I were to put, $2 or $3 grand in this house, which you probably wouldn't, I would try to get some of that back. I would probably ask another $100, $150 a month to try and start to recoup that over the few years. I wouldn't just throw money into it just to make it look nice. It'd be so I could get more rent for it.
Yeah, that's always the trade-off is, do you spruce it up and try to increase the rent, or do you just kind of leave it as is?
I think as we're talking, I think there's a potential tenant that just went to the front door.
Holy
so
smokes.
things that happen. The things you see when you record YouTube videos. Should we get their opinions?
Hi guys, feel free to look around.
Thanks. Thank you.
Man, this is a good deal.
So there are some expenses that you have to do that you don't really get any benefit out of the rent. And one of them was this deck. Believe it or not, we've replaced this deck, I don't know, I'm going to say 7, 8, 10 years ago. And that's because the previous deck was just deteriorated. And you needed to do something. And you don't really get extra rent out of replacing an old deck. But you got to do some things that are just updating. And again, we probably need to stain it right now this year before we get it rented. The other thing that is, I don't know if you can tell, but this is old masonite siding. And at some point, we're going to have to put new siding on it. And if you look around like at the neighbors' houses here, they put siding on the house and new soffits and stuff. And sooner or later, we're going to have to do that here. We talked about doing it this time, but we decided to rent it again. But sometime in the next 4 or 5 years, we're probably going to have to side it.
All right, we're going to walk through the 2 bathrooms and the 3 bedrooms and see what we would or wouldn't do. As you can see in this first bathroom that Yates is going to show you, everything's in pretty good shape. I don't really know that you would get any value out of upgrading anything. Everything's, pretty new. So I would personally leave it just how it is.
You and I agree on something,
We
Sam.
agree on something. I don't want to just throw money away, Brian. It's got to add value in my opinion.
The bedroom is pretty much, we try to keep things pretty maintenance free. We put dolly lights in, that's what I call them anyway. They're simple, but they provide light. They're overhead lighting. Carpet in most of our bedrooms. Some of our newer houses, especially the smaller houses, we're doing a hard surface floor. But on a house that's a good sized house like this one, generally we just do carpet in the bedrooms and just make sure it's freshly painted and stuff.
Oh, hi, Brian. Good to see you here. Fancy running into you here. So as he kind of said, everything's in great shape for the most part in the house. There's not a whole lot that I would do differently than you would do. But there is one thing to note. There's a difference when you're buying a house that for the very first time with the BRRRR method, you do need to do things to fix it up for it to appraise out. You're not worried about an appraisal right now, so that's part of it. You're just worried about cash flow. Any improvement you make right now comes out of your pocket, you do not get it back until you refinance or sell. It's different with the BRRRR method. When you're doing it from the beginning, you do get that back, so you do kind of potentially want to do a few more things. That is something to note.
That's a very good point.
Thank you.
If you've owned a house for several years like we have on this house, if we're going to spruce it up, it's out of our pocket, unless we go refinance it, which we generally aren't planning on doing. But do it when you're doing the BRRRR method. Get all those expenses out.
When you bought this house, I was in high school, so that's been a little bit, yeah.
Feels like yesterday to me.
Well, there you go. Not me. That doesn't feel like yesterday high school to me. But yeah, overall, there's not a whole lot that I think we would do differently. But I think I would do a few things differently just to try and get a little bit more rent and maybe rent it faster. Kind of give and take.
Nice. What would you do with the master bath?
Let me take a look, Brian. Well, would not do a whole lot in here, I don't think. Maybe replace the toilet with an adult height. That'd maybe be it. $89.99 at your local hardware store. But no, in all honesty, I wouldn't do anything in here either. Everything's in great shape. Man, this is an important tidbit here. We'll call this a bonus Bryan tip. Just the value of getting good tenants, because not every property, this property hasn't been cleaned. Not every property you go to the day after the tenant leaves and it looks like this. So that's part of the value of having a good tenant. If you have a bad tenant in place, you're sometimes forced to do things you don't want to do to get it. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, and strategy-wise. So one of the things that we started several years ago is every time anybody that moves into one of our houses, when we're doing our tenant screening process, we do a home visit with them. So we go to the house that they're living in, and we meet them at that house. We sign the lease up at that house, but before we sign the lease up, we just take a little tour of their house, ask them to show us around, and if they take good care of that house, we assume they're going to take good care of our house.
And that's not cheap for you. That costs you have to pay people time and money to do that, but it's a preventative measure that can really help in the long term. Like, I'm sure you went to this house and saw that they took good care of it, and now you potentially don't have to do anything, or you could do a little bit, but lots of times, or not lots of times I guess, but sometimes we'll take over a property and we're forced to do things. We're forced to paint, we're forced to replace the carpets, and forced to do things that end up eating a lot of your cash that you have available, and no one has unlimited cash, so you kind of have to make well, Bryan does, but most people don't have no. Most people don't have unlimited cash, so that is a huge part of all of this, is getting a good tenant in place that leaves it like this, because this is awesome.
Come on, let's go to the basement.
Before we go, like the video.
So we're down in the lower level of this house. It's got a really nice family room, rec room area, and it's got this fireplace. So, I don't know, part of me loves fireplaces and part of me hates them.
Yeah.
I love them because there are definitely some tenants that'll just see the fireplace and go, oh, that's exciting. We can have a fire, we can sit by the fire.
The people that want a fireplace and like a fireplace, it's a great feature.
Absolutely.
And there's probably a good portion of people that don't care either way, and it doesn't matter. Some people might not want it with little kids and stuff like that because they can't use it, but overall, yeah, it just kind of depends on whoever's moving in, what their opinion is of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that, Sam. I think in general most tenants would love the fireplace, but I could be wrong about that. As a landlord, I kind of feel like there's a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of concern about this is a wood burning fireplace that somebody that doesn't know how to handle a fire has an issue. Potential fire in the house, potential sparks coming out on the carpet. So there is concerns about having a fireplace.
And you have to clean the chute every few years. So it is, we like to be as maintenance free. Both of us have the very same philosophy. We want it to be nice rentals, but as maintenance free as possible. And this is definitely a maintenance item. So I see both sides of it. I guess maybe paying a little bit, this is a nicer place, is gonna get nicer rent than that. I would be more comfortable with a $1,600 a month rental with a fireplace in it than maybe a different one. So I would not replace it. Let's leave it at that. I would leave the fireplace. I don't know if
would you paint it?
No.
Just leave it the way it is.
I would. Yep. So Bryan, does this house have an irrigation system in it?
So Sam, how did you know that?
It's just a guess. I just guessed.
It does. We bought this house, like I said earlier, from an engineer back in 2004, and they had a in-ground sprinkler system that they had active. We left it active for like the first tenant or two, but we just found out it's a maintenance issue. Turning it on, turning it off. Most tenants don't know what to do with them, so we've just basically disabled it. So
okay.
we don't use it anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's definitely a maintenance item. The whole thing is, our whole concept is making things as maintenance free as possible.
Yeah.
I have one at my house, and you have to pay people to turn it off and turn it on and get it pressure tested, and it's a lot of extra expense for not a whole lot of value, and things could definitely go wrong with it. So that makes a lot of sense. So along those lines, one of the biggest expenses you have potentially when owning rental properties is when tenants leave. You do have some expenses when they're there, fixing this or that, a few different things, but usually there's nothing major that goes on. If something happens, they rip the carpet or do something to the house, they usually won't even tell you, and you don't find out unless you get in it until they move out. So that's important. So it's extremely important to have good tenants and reduce the amount of maintenance on turns, because that's a huge expense because it comes out of your pocket.
Totally, and I would say that on average, and our houses range from about 900 square foot to about 1,800 square foot. Most of them in that 1,200-ish square foot size. And I would say on average our turnover costs us between $2,000 and $2,500, something like that. I don't know, how's that compared to where you guys are at?
Yeah, that's probably pretty similar. Ours is probably maybe a little bit less right now because our portfolio is newer, and almost every single house that we've done with the BRRRR method, we've done everything with the BRRRR method, but we did buy 27 that we didn't do anything to, but most of them we have fixed up. So when you fix them up and kind of run once through everything, don't really have, you'll just have a few things here or there, paint a room or this or that, as opposed to usually bigger maintenance items when things wear out and you have to replace them, like an AC or something like that could cost. We're doing that right now at the beginning of the rehab, so we don't have to do that, so we get our money back. So.
Yeah. Sam, I was trying to think, what's the biggest expense you've ever had at turnover? I think we've had a couple that have pushed 15 grand. Have you ever had one that size?
We have. We just had one that that was 10 grand, and what we do with that, being that our portfolio is so new and we don't have a bunch of cash reserves, if it costs more than 7 grand, we sell it. Okay. So we'll just, because we bought it,
philosophy.
We bought it at a discount. It's hopefully in a good area, or it is in a good area. We wouldn't have bought it. So you have some equity into it, and in order to either come out of cash or have to refinance and try to tap into that equity, we just sell it. So if it's 5 to 7 grand or less, we will keep it and just kind of bite the bullet for the short term and get it back with rent. If it's more than that, we just sell it and usually make 10 or 15 grand that maybe we can use on the next one that needs a little bit of work. So that's kind of our philosophy.
I think that's a super cool philosophy, and then honestly, that's kind of the way I did it a while back. What we've switched to is I kind of look at every house when it becomes vacant now is this a house that I want to own for the rest of my life? And if it's the house that I want to own for the rest of my life, we figure we either just, like this house, we're going to own this house for the rest of our lives. We're not doing much work to it now, but we know that some days in the next few years, we're going to have to side it. We're going to probably redo the flooring again, redo the kitchen, things along those lines. But I like that philosophy that you have.
I think another thing that we look at is local municipalities. Some are a lot stricter than others. Like this, in other municipalities, may get flagged for a few different things, when you get occupancy, and some municipalities don't even require internal occupancy. So there's a lot of different rules, especially in St. Louis. There's so many different little cities and townships that each one has their different rules. So that does play a factor. We had a house that we rehabbed, and the tenant moved out a year later, and we got hit with $4,000 worth of inspection items that a different inspector passed 12 months before. So that's part of it. So there's a lot of different things that go in to make those decisions. It's just, you just never know what you catch the mood of the inspector that day.
So guys, what would you do to this house? Would you update the kitchen? Would you redo the siding? Would you leave it just the way it is and rent it out? I mean, we're getting $15.50 just the way it is. Is it worth spending a little bit of money on it?
Let us know. We'd appreciate it.
We usually talk about the bathrooms and Yates would just paint into the bedrooms, and then we don't even talk about them. Or just,
but he usually stands in the shower or something.
yeah, I do something.
And over there, I'm gonna hide Rachel in my back pocket.
She about fit.
All right.
That was a very wimpy clap.
You don't need to clap anymore.
Do we have to clap again?
No. He just does it.